Hello everybody, welcome to What Culture. Full spoilers for Spider-Man No Way Home as we're going to be diving into the post-credits scenes for the newest movie. I should have mentioned that I'm Scott Tailford, dove in to watch Spider-Man this morning, and there's a ton of stuff to talk about. Now we're going to have a whole bunch of videos on the channel. We have a full spoiler discussion over there. There's a half-hour breakdown where we dive into all of the wider ramifications of everything that happens in the back half of the movie, alongside, the other stuff that's in there, the likes of Daredevil being in there, stuff like that. But if we're going to focus on the post-credits stuff, that confirmed one of the things that I was most excited for coming out of Venom Let There Be Carnage, which is that Eddie Brock himself pops up in the post-credit scene, sitting at a bar, letting Venom inside his head, talking to the barman, trying to figure out what the hell this new reality is that he finds himself in. Now, one thing to mention here is that in Venom Let There Be Carnage, Venom says to Eddie before they go across into the MCU that Portal seems to be, in Venom's case, triggered by Venom accessing all of his knowledge banks, whereas in Spidey it's triggered by Doctor Strange's spell, but whatever. Venom ends up in the MCU, sat there at the bar trying to figure out what's going on, and it's interesting to note that in the Venom side of things, Venom recognizes Tom Holland, or at least he does that when he first sees Tom Holland on the TV screen. He says, that guy, as in the symbiote has come into contact with Tom Holland, Peter Parker before, whatever that is, which is an interesting thing to note going forward, because we know there's going to be Spider-Man 4, 5, and 6 at some point going forward, and the end of this movie leaves everything wide open. The way that No Way Home's plot rolls out is that eventually Peter Parker decides to accept the fact that everybody is better off without him being in their lives, so he does a whole deal with Doctor Strange to reset everything, which fixes all the fractures and all the other problems that are going on in that movie, but also means that everybody who has arrived in the MCU timeline goes back to where they came from. Now, when it goes to the bar and you get to see Venom sat there, or Eddie Brock sat there, figuring out and wondering on our part whether this is going to be the future of the MCU, he then does start to disappear and vanish from what would be the MCU timeline. One super interesting thing to point out here, though, is that a tiny piece of the symbiote is left on the bar itself, leading me to immediately assume that the MCU is going to have a different version of Venom, or a different version of the symbiote. Obviously, in the comics, the symbiotes are a whole planet full of creatures. There's a whole hierarchy there. There's a ton of different symbiotes. Obviously, we're seeing Carnage on the big screen now, but that's a whole thing for the MCU to potentially explore in a different way. Maybe Sony gets their Venom movies over here, and the MCU does their version of symbiote stuff over here.
Regardless, this absolutely opens up the door for symbiotes in the MCU, and more importantly, for an MCU version of Eddie Brock and Venom. Of course, Brock wasn't the first person a symbiote bonded with in the comics, that being Peter Parker himself, if we're redoing the story seen in Spider-Man 3, and so any new version of Venom could do other things before showing up in full. Also, does this mean we get a new version of the Tobey Maguire dance? I mean, I both want and do not want exactly that. Potential symbiote candidates for the next 3 Spidey movies, if we're going off what happened in the comics, are Eddie's ex-wife Anne Weying, Flash Thompson, Mac Gargan, Lee Price, Angel Fortunato, and Patricia Robertson. It's worth noting too that Mac the Scorpion Gargan has already been seeded in the MCU, appearing in Spider-Man Homecoming and being played by the phenomenal Michael Mando. Homecoming's post-credits prison scene mentioned that Gargan has some boys on the outside willing to help him, which I'm just saying could be a way to link J.K. Simmons returning J. Jonah Jameson into the creation of the Scorpion proper. The most famous version of the Venom storyline is 1984's Secret Wars issue 8, and by the time No Way Home rolls to a close, Peter has lost his family, his girlfriend, and all his friends. Aunt May is dead, and nobody else in the entire world knows who Peter Parker is. This is Peter Parker as on his own as he's ever been in any live-action setting to date, and maybe it comes to be that his internal angst and torment pushes him towards the small blob of symbiote goo left behind by Venom. With Parker prepared to kill Norman Osborn during the film's climactic battle, we know that this side of Peter now exists, despite all the goodwill he showed until this point.
Because I absolutely love the over-the-top banter version of Venom that we've got in the separate solo movies, but you could argue that's not really the version that people want to see in a main line, the main thread. So it's curious what's going to happen with that, but it's worth pointing out that a little symbiote now exists standalone, sitting in the MCU in whatever that bar is, and whatever that's going to mean to the Spider-Man canon going forward, it all started there. Another thing that I want to touch on is just bringing together everything that's happening in all of these movies right now, which is to sort of say that if you go off the end of Spider-Man, No Way Home, he's just made the 616 suit, the classic, traditional, old school, red and blue, gorgeous, original Spider-Man suit, and he goes off and he's swinging around the city, and that's how No Way Home ends, before we get to the post-credit scene featuring Venom. The overall thing that I think they're going for, though, is this reset to the Spider-Man fiction. Obviously, again, full spoilers, Aunt May dies in this movie, meaning that to this Spider-Man, Tom Holland's Peter Parker, May dying is his Uncle Ben, is his Gwen, is his catalyst for becoming Spider-Man and staying Spider-Man going forward. So you can argue that these three movies, Homecoming, Far From Home, No Way Home, are just literally the setting for what is now going to be the definitive MCU Spider-Man, and we're returning to the likes of Venom storylines. I want to bring in Kingpin as well, considering that he's been heavily rumored and now shown in the Hawkeye series, and it seems like, alongside also Daredevil / Matt Murdock being in there, the fact that they are, sowing the seeds of all these legacy characters who haven't been done justice in the MCU. They have all these different seeds that they've started putting down there that they can bring together going forward. Like I mentioned, there are 3 main movies still to come, and they have a nice table laid out with a symbiote, Daredevil, and Kingpin to do whatever stories they want to do going forward. Last thing is the second post-credits scene, which isn't really a scene at all. We actually just get a trailer for Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, which might launch online, alongside the movie. It depends whether or not Sony want to ruin the fact that you're supposed to stay till after the credits or not. I guess we'll see whether that's on YouTube by now. But if it's not, the thing that you're rewarded for, or rewarded with, if you sit through the entirety of the credits, is a look at Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And if you're a fan of What If, the animated series over on Disney+, seems like they are directly adapting episode 4 of that show, which is the one where Doctor Strange, in an effort to revive Christine no matter what, gets lost in a whole bunch of different realities, different versions of himself, different ways to, alter the course of the way that history and certain events, certain points in time are supposed to go, because he's determined to resurrect Christine no matter what, leading to an incredibly over-the-top evil version of himself that is just consuming creatures from the mirror dimension or whatever other dimensions he can access, becoming this super evil over-the-top version of himself. In the final credits scene that we see after No Way Home, this evil version of Doctor Strange walks out and confronts the regular Doctor Strange that we know of from all the movies that we've seen so far. So however that thing plays out seems very similar to the way that it goes in the What If series, but whether the live action version has anything close to the same extremely sad ending that the animation had, I guess we'll have to wait and see. For now, though, that is just one of the many things people are talking about from the smorgasbord of ideas and capitalization on hype that is Spider-Man No Way Home. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. Are you excited for the future of the Spider-Man franchise? And what do you think is going to be done with the likes of Daredevil, the Symbiote, Kingpin, Doctor Strange, and everything else? For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com, and I'll catch you soon.